Okay, great.
Well,
So now we're going to talk about two texts together. One from the Homeric Hymn to Herakles, verses 4 through 6, and the beginning of the Odyssey, the first 5 verses.
yes, and I just treasure the Homeric hymn to Herakles. Most classicists don't know what to do with the Homeric hymns because they seem to be appendices to the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they're really designed to be a foregrounding and a stab at trying to situate how the Iliad and the Odyssey would be performed at a festival. And in this case, the presiding entity is Herakles, who, earlier than other heroes, is explicitly a god in certain contexts. It's very difficult to talk about this, that heroes, once they're dead, can be called a theos, a god. And I mean theos, I don't mean daimon, which is ambivalent, but theos, which is explicitly a god. And you say, how can that be? Gods are immortal, and heroes are mortal. But there's this gray area of immortalization. In any case, I could talk on and on about how interesting...
I have a question about something you said,
Sure.
actually. You said that the Homeric hymns are a kind of a model for performance of the Homeric epics?
A model for situating the performance in a festival.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that Homeric poetry would be expected to be performed at a big festival.
Mm-hmm. And the hymns are as well?
And,
you mean?
And any hymn is morphologically the way you begin any performance at a festival.
Okay.
The hymn situates who the number one god is or hero is presiding over the festival.
Okay.
And I'm saying with Herakles, when you're talking about an entity that presides over a festival, it's wearing the hat of a god. Mm-hmm. But I'm also saying, well, Herakles is an immortalized character, so he's not immortal. He did have to die, but then once he's dead, he's eligible for the status of a theos.
Right.
And what's beautiful about this particular hymn is that he is like a composite of Achilles and Odysseus. So if you put together the very basics that are being said about Herakles' career as a hero before he's immortalized, you see very strong indications that he is part Odysseus, part Achilles. And I deliberately said it in that order instead of saying part Achilles, part Odysseus, because at the beginning, at line 4, the travelings, the wanderings of Herakles are worded in such a way that we instantly think of the Odyssey, especially if you look at line 5, where he veers, just as Odysseus veers from the desired path from A to B, and wandering off, and then there are all of these separate missions. But then when we hear in line 6 that he performed many reckless things on his own, you tend to think more of Achilles because he does more spectacularly reckless things than Odysseus. I would say the one real moral shocker in the case of Odysseus is how he is so ruthless in killing off the suitors, some of whom are morally ambivalent and aren't 100% bad guys, if I can put it that way. And then even worse, how he, with the help of Telemachus, kills off the disloyal female servants. Right. That is meant to be a shocker, and that's reckless, but if you compare the recklessness of Achilles
comes out on top.
He is definitely somebody that you notice first. And Exhibit A, maybe you won't think of this as the first thing that should come into my mind, but sacrificing young Trojan boys on the funeral pyre of Patroklos. I've proved to myself, at least, that that is morally reprehensible, and it messes up the sacrifice. It messes up the cremation. It is exhibit A for dysfunctional behavior by heroes in myth that has to be compensated for in the ritual that responds to whatever happens in myth. So anyway, to come back to this particular passage, I think it's a perfect example of a synthesis between hero type Achilles and hero type Odysseus, and now I'll do it in the conventional order. If we can segue directly, shall we segue directly to our 22 text E? Because Keith, the way you already linked the two passages makes perfect sense to me, especially if we concentrate on the way the Homeric hymn to Herakles is talking about Odysseus type features in lines 4 and 5. And wow, when you look at lines 1 through 5 in the Odyssey, the correspondences in wording are so noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially veering from his path and wandering off. That's
it's just there you are. Yes, and even the emphasis on all the different kinds of experiences, cognitive experiences that Odysseus has. There's a lot of that in the Herakles narrative, although the Herakles narrative is much shorter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, traveling all over the earth. Presumably he had experiences, but even the missions are like this multiplicity of
it's just amazing
experiences.
Yes, so it's one of those things where if we had more of Herakles, more about Herakles than we do, because after all, in the book Ancient Greek Hero, in 24 hours, I have to take excerpts from prose accounts on the life of Herakles. I don't have really good poetic versions, which I would like to have, but in a sense, this very compressed bit that we see in the Homeric hymn to Herakles will do just fine. It really nails those characteristics of Herakles that we can compare most readily with the characteristics of Odysseus, which is what we're now doing, but we could do a similar exercise focusing on the characteristics of Achilles in the Iliad.